kind of through rose-colored glasses. What's the danger of that for us as Christians today? And maybe it's not preachers necessarily, but even people that we view in a religious light. What's the danger that we have with that, Dan?
This idea of a cult of personality is really what you're describing here. The danger in that is that, well, there are probably many dangers, but at least one of the dangers is that by putting such a person on a pedestal, you can overlook the things they do wrong. You can overlook their false teaching at times. And there have been, and look, I'm a PK, and Ray knows I'm a preacher's kid. And all my life, I've kind of put my own dad on a pedestal, like we do, right, as sons and daughters. But there have been times my dad's been wrong. And, we have to be willing to see when these figureheads in our lives are wrong. And we need to see the truth, not what we want to see through them.
I think that, thank you, PK. We'll bring that up from time to time. PK. We're very fortunate here to have elders as leaders that are very quick to admit that they're not going to be perfect. And there's no one that's going to be perfect in making all the decisions. But they're going to continue to do and work with shepherding the flock here by doing what God would have them to do. And that's something that as Christians, we have the same obligation that we need to also be a positive influence to those who are around us and recognize that you are an influence. If you're associated with this body of Christians here, at some point, someone's going to know that. And you always want to make sure that you're doing and living a way in your life that's always going to bring about people to have a positive thought and a positive light, especially to the church here. And that's not, again, does not say it's going to be perfect, but it's something that we need to strive for, and that is living a life that is dedicated to Christ, and not be like Tobiah, who was more concerned about his own self-worth than those who were around him. All right, so that was chapter 6. I thought there were some good discussions with that. We'll move on now to Nehemiah chapter 7. Yeah.
Before we hit chapter 7, I don't remember if we covered this on Sunday or not. I don't remember it, but if we did, just correct me. There's one particular verse in chapter 6 that really struck me, and it kind of made me think about our recent situation in our time, really all over the world. And it's in verse 11. After Shemaiah had, kind of planned this little evil plan to get him into, kind of behind
Right.
closed doors. In verse 11, Nehemiah says, "Should such a man as I flee? And who is there such as I who would go into the temple to save his life?" That really struck me. And the reason it struck me is obviously, recent events in the last few years. We had the COVID scare, COVID epidemic, pandemic, whatever we want to call it.
Yeah.
I just wondered if that struck anybody else.
Well, we did talk about it in the context of what would have been wrong with Nehemiah to have gone into the temple. And this is, I think, what we discussed. And why would that be the case? He wasn't a priest. So very specific laws are laid out from the Lord's perspective about who could enter the temple and do so in a manner where their lives wouldn't be taken. And so we did talk about it from that perspective. I think you bring up a good thought, though, Dan, when you think about it from the standpoint of forfeiting our lives and the willingness to give of ourselves, even if that doesn't mean physically losing your life, but giving up your life as it would be where you're focused on all your wants and all your desires. I think we certainly, if you think about Christ and the example that he gave his physical life for us. And today we are to be living sacrifices as well on behalf of honoring God, but also in a servant's heart and serving one another. So I do think that is a good thought from that perspective. Other ideas or thoughts on that? I do think that we need to take all the examples that we can from Nehemiah because of the leadership he showed and obviously the sacrifice he made in getting to this point. Yes, sir, dear. You think about Nehemiah and what he was willing to sacrifice. He was the cupbearer, right? As a cupbearer, you're pretty much as high as you can get without being actually in a position where you're, the king himself. He was in a very, great position from a worldly perspective. But he recognized that there was, after much prayer, there was something there that needed to be done. And he needed to, as you're talking about, Daryl, lead and not necessarily shield himself from walking away from that life of privilege. Mm-hmm. It doesn't compute, does it? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Good thoughts. Anyone else? Great conversation on a Wednesday evening after a busy week. So always appreciative of that. So let's look at Nehemiah chapter 7. Nehemiah chapter 7, and we'll look at the first couple of verses. Now, so the wall has been completed at this point, and this is a chapter that really looks at, what's next. The big completion has taken place. Now, what do you do with it? And I think Nehemiah gives us some context as to what was the proper way to move forward. Verses 1 and 2, it says, "Now when the wall had been built and I had set up the doors and the gatekeepers, the singers, and the Levites had been appointed, I gave my brother Hananiah and Hananiah, the governor of the castle, charge over Jerusalem. For he was a more faithful and God-fearing man than many." If you look at the temple or the walls being built, there's a passage in Isaiah chapter 62 I wanted to read for you guys this evening. In Isaiah chapter 62 in verse 6, beginning in verse 6, it says, "On your walls, O Jerusalem, I have set watchmen all the day and all the night. They shall never be silent. You who put the Lord in remembrance, take no rest, and give him no rest until he establishes Jerusalem and makes it a praise in the earth." we read in these first couple of verses what Nehemiah felt was the proper thing to do. And what was that as it relates to the actual gate itself? What did he put in place? Put guards, okay. What else? He references two other individuals that, singers, and then what was the other thing listed there? Was Levites. So what are we, when you start talking about singers and you start talking about Levites, where the priests would have come from, what's being prepared at this point? Are we not preparing for worship? We're preparing to worship God. I mean, this wall has been the focus all along the way, and worship from a temple perspective is something that probably hasn't been done as regularly as it should have been. And here, Nehemiah, he's not telling the people, let's have a celebration. Let's focus on our glorious achievement that we did in 52 days. What does he do? He says, let's bring together, first of all, people to watch the gate, and let's begin the process of assembling the worship of God. It's a great lesson. I mean, I don't know about you, but if you maybe went to school for a number of years to achieve a certain degree, or if you maybe worked in an industry for a number of years and you had certain achievements, there's always that celebration that you wanted to have, right? That focus on, look at what we've done. Look at what we've gotten accomplished. And I think if anybody had the right to do that, it would have been Nehemiah. After it had been over 100 years that they had even talked about this wall getting built, and he does it in 52 days, I think I'd want to celebrate. What's the pitfall if that's your focus and not the way Nehemiah approaches it? What's the pitfall there?
You hinted on it when you said what's your focus. You're focused on self.
Self. You know, I, me, and my are words that really will get you. And I've taught some of the kids' classes in the past, and I know one of the things that I've talked about a lot is those words of I, me, and my, and how it's just natural to be selfish. It truly is. I mean, you look at little children, you know, sometimes some of them will share. My kids weren't one of those kids, but nor was I as a child, so they got it honest. But I, me, and my is something that we've talked about a lot in the kids' classes, and especially I know I taught the 5th and 6th grade, and I asked, I bet each of you get up in the morning and the first thing you think about is, what am I going to fix my brother or my sister for breakfast when I go downstairs? And not a one of them, shockingly, said that they did that. And I said, well, why don't you do that? And they said, well, I'm hungry in the mornings usually, and I hadn't eaten since supper the night before, so I think about what I'm going to get to eat. It's just part of who we are, and that's what you're fighting against every single day. You know, what Dan was talking about earlier about forfeiting your life, at least sacrificing what you enjoy doing. That's just not a natural thing. That's something that you learn over time and with maturity. And Nehemiah, I think, shows us a lot of maturity here by not taking this moment to celebrate the accomplishment of getting this done in 52 days, but rather it's time to bring glory to God. And he gets and sets in order the things that they were getting prepared to do and talking about.
You have to remember how he started in prayer, which is kind of like being pleased before and thanks after.
Absolutely. You know, prayer is something we've talked a lot about in this class, right? We've seen a lot of examples of that. We've seen examples of Nehemiah and the prayers, the multiple prayers With the short ones we've talked about, he quickly went to God in prayer by these phrases that we've read all along the way. But again, the focus here was not on celebrating his achievement, but it was rather putting things in order. And it mentions his brother Hanani and Hananiah being put in place because they were considered more faithful and God-fearing man than many. I guess he's specifically referring there to Hananiah. He could trust him, right? Absolutely. He could trust them, but isn't it important when you're putting things in order to have point people, people that can be looked at? Some of the readings that I looked at as to why he might have done this was that Nehemiah had been away, and he might have needed to go back to Persia to kind of reestablish his authority with the king. I don't know if that's true or not, and it's irrelevant to the point. But what is important is that he was putting things in order, and he was giving leaders that he could trust the opportunity to lead. Yeah, Dan.
That language that Nehemiah uses there is really impressive. We don't often talk that way.
Specifically, what are you referring to there, Dan?
Referring to was, for he was a faithful man and feared God more than many. What we normally say is, well, let's put Trey. Let's put Trey. Jamie's sitting in front of me, so let's put Trey in charge of it because he's trustworthy. We don't. Where we should say he fears God. So let's put him in charge of it. Because doesn't fearing the fear of God equal trustworthiness in the church, in the household of God? And I think that language is just so impressive.
Yeah, to be honest, I hadn't thought about it in that context. But often we'll use words that are more humanistically appreciated, right? He's a great leader, or she is a great supporter of efforts that we have here and activities that we participate here in from a church standpoint, helping others. But being God-fearing, not often we hear that as much. Now, I think.
I'd rather hear that about myself.
Well, I think we certainly do. At the end of one's life, they'll talk about that maybe at a funeral or whatnot. But we don't hear that very often. So, good point. Anyone else? Yes, sir. Yes, and I think while Nehemiah was able to do a lot, he certainly was looking to these individuals to create that structure, that leadership structure that was needed. What's also important about these two gentlemen that we know about early on, what was their role in the very beginning of Nehemiah? They brought the news about how things really were and the status of the wall. So it's kind of appropriate that given Nehemiah's learning of the wall status and what it looked like in the homeland, that he would appoint these two individuals, as well as obviously their spiritual faithfulness to God. Yeah.
Eric, I think it's also noteworthy that I think we would all agree Nehemiah trusted God. I mean, just in the 6th chapter, he said, I'm not running away.
Right.
It's clear he trusted God. He also put gatekeepers in, and he put guards in the few houses that they had. So there's a lesson there for there's a balance there, right? Those two things are not mutually exclusive. You can trust God, and you can still take logical precautions.
Appropriate. Yeah.
In the light of danger, it doesn't mean you don't trust God when you're doing it.
Yeah, really good point. When you think about the importance of a watchman, I also wrote down another passage in similar form that I wanted to share with you in Psalms chapter 15, beginning in verse 1. It says, "A psalm of David, O Lord, who shall sojourn in your tent? Who shall dwell on your holy hill? He who walks blamelessly and does what is right and speaks truth in his heart, who does not slander with his tongue and does no evil to his neighbor, nor takes up a reproach against his friend, in whose eyes a vile person is despised, but who honors those who fear the Lord, who swears to his own hurt and does not change." That's what Hananiah and Hanai brought to the table, is a fear of the Lord. So I'll pause there. Any other thoughts or comments? Yeah.
Yeah, just one thing, Eric. I think Adam makes a good point. And, my comment earlier about, our lives being forfeit, I don't want to make it seem that somehow I believe we should just be stupid and throw our lives to the wind because we have faith. Jesus himself talked about that in Luke 16. He talked about the fact that sometimes the sons of light, the saints of light, are not as smart as worldly people. They're not quite as shrewd. And so even Jesus taught the benefits of being shrewd in this life. So I think Adam does make a good point. There's nothing wrong with being logical and smart about things while also having faith.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I didn't take it that way. So,
Yeah, me neither. No, I mean, as long as, take the other side of that, if protecting yourself and taking those precautions is putting you in direct conflict with something that God has commanded you to do, that's different.
right.
And so there are two sides of this. In this
Yep.
case, he was doing both. He was trusting God. He was taking earthly precautions, and that wasn't in conflict
Yeah.
with anything God had asked him to do. If you cross over that, now we got a different.
Absolutely. Well, Ezra brought no one in the form of soldiers when he came to early on to build the wall, whereas Nehemiah came with a whole squadron of soldiers. So I think both your points are well noted, and we'll even read here in verses 3 and 4 about the people that they had standing watch. But I do think sacrificing our lives is something we need to continue to talk about, and not throwing it up in the air for the wind to take away and do with it what it will to our lives. But sacrificing is something that's hard, because we don't naturally think that way. And we've got to continue to put that in front of us in order to achieve sacrificial lives. Yeah.
Somewhat along those lines, I was going to note that, you see the opportunity to serve continues to present itself to these individuals, right? Because not only have they just completed this challenge of building this wall, and as you pointed out, Nehemiah didn't throw it in celebration and say, look what great things we did, right? But these very guards that are appointed were from inhabitants of Jerusalem. So it's the individuals that were doing that, again, the opportunity to serve. And that's something that we can keep in mind, that as we may accomplish a task, there's always something before us to keep us redirected on things that are going to bring glory and honor to God.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I said Sunday morning, we can all do better. We can all do better. And I would challenge each and every one of us in this room to find a way to do better. We've got people that are struggling with various illnesses. We heard some just terrible news this afternoon about Kerry and what he's dealing with. There's opportunities all around you. Let's all do better when it comes to sacrificing our time to engage and give that time over to someone else in whatever capacity that might take. So, good thoughts, good comments. So let's look at verses 3 and 4. It says, "And I said to them, let not the gates of Jerusalem be open until the sun is hot. And while they are standing guard, let them shut and bar the doors. Appoint guards from among the inhabitants of Jerusalem, some at their guard post, and some in the front of their own homes. The city was wide and large, but the people within it were few, and no houses had been rebuilt." Nehemiah was very specific, wasn't he, here? Now, I'm not sure about not opening the gates until the sun is hot. Don't really have a thought on that. Maybe somebody else read something on that front. Sun up. So that's more of the darkness versus light, okay? Yeah.
It also, we'll see this kind of bookended with some of the last parts of the book, where in your Bible probably says that section is Nehemiah's final reforms, and he's going around seeing all the ways that Israel's kind of backsliding, and one of them is the way that they're not honoring the Sabbath. And he explicitly calls out, he says, yeah, they were leaving the gate open too much. I told them to shut the gate before sundown on the Sabbath and don't open it until the Sabbath is over. So it's kind of, this is absolutely, God and the writer of this book kind of teeing up this artistic kind of, call and response. We're like, yeah, hey, I was really focused on the gates here, and here's how they backslid, and I had to re-drill that home for them later.
Okay. That's a good thought on that. And, what I was kind of honed in on with all of this was, besides them standing guard, was just the very specifics that are laid out here. Even so much so as beyond the guards, some at their guard post and some in front of their own homes. Everyone was taking an active part in this process. Nehemiah was putting things in order. He was focused initially on worship, and now he's talking about the moving forward, that everyone's playing a part in this, even to the level of you just protecting your own homes. And it also noted in verse 4 that the city was wide and large, but within the people within it were few, and no houses had been rebuilt. There was very few homes inside the wall, right? A lot of things have been destroyed. A lot of things have been taken away. And we'll read here in a little bit about the actual numbers that they want to, if you will, refill these walls with. But any thoughts or comments around those couple of verses there as you think about kind of the view here? They've spent all this time on these walls, and I know we talked about the length of these walls being over a mile long. So you've got walls that go extended periods of yards, if you will, and there's not much inside of it. Yeah.
The concept of not many people living in the city, like they've just redone these walls. They probably look beautiful. The gates, all this new timber looks great. But so few people in there. It reminds me of the parable when Jesus talks about, like, okay, if there's a demon in the house and you get him out of there, but then the demon comes back and the house is empty. It's like swept clean. It looks great, but it's empty. Then he's going to come back with 7 more demons and make it worse than it was before. It's like Nehemiah, he put in all this work to rebuild the walls, but if the people weren't willing to kind of come together as a group and live here and make it mean something, then sure enough, again, I bring it up again in this last chapter, you're going to see that it's full of outsiders. It's full of people who are not following God's law, not following the Sabbath. It's full of kind of intermarrying and
Yeah.
who don't even know Hebrew at that point. And so it just kind of reminds me of Jesus' story in the New Testament. And sometimes that parable is a little hard to really figure out sometimes, but I think it really does apply.
It does apply here. Absolutely, absolutely. Because if you don't fill it with, as we'll see here, he wants to actually return some of the exiles. If you don't fill it with exiles, it'll get filled with something. And, our hearts are like that too. If our hearts are emptied maybe through delusions of the way things are going in your life or challenges that are there, and you start filling it with things that are not spiritual, what will you typically try to fill it with? Material things. You fill it with things in the world, right? And we know how that can go. I've had friends and, even family that they filled their lives with, vices of this world that, didn't help them in any way. And you start looking at someone that's dealt with alcoholism, and I had a friend that I went and picked up at Cumberland, and, he'd been in treatment, and this is a guy that he just had lived with a lot of challenges and tragedies. And that's what he chose to fill it with. And we've all had friends and family that we've known that have made the wrong decisions. It's important as Christians that as we deal with whatever we deal with in life, that we're filling our hearts continually with the messages that God would have us to know about in Scripture. Because it doesn't take much for you to go down the wrong path and you start filling your life and your heart with non-spiritual things. It can happen so quickly, you don't even realize it. All right, thoughts or comments? Thank you so much for everyone's comments this evening. It's been really good. So to that end, when we think about filling these walls, let's skip down to verse 5. It says, "Then my God put into my heart," this is Nehemiah speaking, "to assemble the nobles and the officials and the people to be enrolled by genealogy. And I found the book of the genealogy of those who came up at the first, and I found written in it, these were the people of the province who came up out of the captivity of those exiles whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried into exile. They returned to Jerusalem and Judah, each to his own. They came with Zerubbabel, Jeshua, Nehemiah, Azariah, Ramiah, Nahamani, Mordecai, Bilshan, Mispereth, Bigvai, Nahum, and Benai." And it says the number of the people of Israel, and it goes on and talks about each of the numbers of each of these particular groups. The city needed numbers. It needed people to fill in these walls. And he goes about by asking for the genealogies of these former families. Where also do we see this same listing of families earlier in Ezra? Ezra 2. Ezra chapter 2, you see pretty much the same listing of families. There are some discrepancies in that. I think that's you're missing the point if you get caught up into that piece of it. But what's the point of Nehemiah? What's kind of a symbolic aspect of what is he trying to accomplish by going back and looking at these genealogies and actually recognizing these families in this way?
Part of it is in verse 73.
Okay?
They all went back to their cities, and he needs to repopulate Jerusalem.
He does. He needs to repopulate them. And I think going back to the previous families that came, it certainly symbolized Nehemiah's interest in bringing back the original. We like the original, don't we? You know, they tried to change Coca-Cola on us a few years ago, and with something new, people didn't like it. Some of you are too.
Great genealogists. I mean, their family tree is what keeps them going.
The family tree, absolutely. If you think about it from a Jewish perspective,
That's what I'm talking about from a Jewish perspective.
that's
Everybody can go back generations and generations from a 10-year-old
exactly.
to an 80-year-old.
exactly. And certainly we see the importance of genealogy even mentioned in the New Testament, right? As we begin the New Testament, you see the importance of how they listed all the way up to Christ himself being born. So genealogies were very important. And
we kind of scoff at it today.
well, we do. We do. Some people really like to talk about their ancestors that they've never met a lot. I don't know if you've experienced that. I had a cousin that always liked to talk about his. He was related to one of the famous writers. I can't even think of who it is now. But anyway, yes, we do somewhat scoff at that. All right, we only got just a few minutes here, and we're gonna wrap it up. I did want to skip down to verse 66. It says the whole assembly together was 42,360, besides their male and female servants, of whom there were 7,337. Think about this. 42,000 people is the number that's mentioned here. What was the number of Jews prior to them going into Babylonian captivity? Probably talking 1 million, 2 million people. We're down to 42,000. 42,000. How the picture of God's people changed in that period of time. All because they followed their own desires, their own wishes. And now did God keep his promise in doing what he would do here and bringing them together? Yeah, but it doesn't look the same, does it? There's consequences to our sins. There's consequences to those. Yes, you can get your life right. Yes, you can make it going the right path again, but there's always going to be consequences to it. And I think that's what we see here with 42,000 versus the original number of people. Yeah, Dan, sorry.
But it's a rebirth, right? It's a baptism of sorts. You look at the flood, it was a baptism of the earth. How many people survived? Out of, billions probably.
Yeah.
Eight people. Here, 42,000. But that's how things always are. God has done this many times throughout the history of the Bible. And there's a reason he does it, because he's getting rid of the evil part of his people. And that should tell us something. There's a big lesson.
Absolutely, there's a big lesson there that he's done this before. It also makes me think about putting your life in a way, positioning your life in a way that is going to deal with all the challenges that come along by focusing on God each and every day. These 42,000 is that's not a big number in comparison to the maybe 2 million people that they were at one time. But can God do things with that 42,000 people? Absolutely. Can he do something with you individually? Absolutely. And again, I think this is the message that, I think Nehemiah is wanting to bring back the exiles for the right reasons. He talks about the noblemen, skipping down to verse 70. He talks about the heads of the fathers' houses. Now, some of the heads of the fathers' houses gave to the work. The governor gave to the treasury. Talks about all the amounts that they gave, and some of the heads of fathers gave into the treasury of the work, and what the rest of the people gave. It mentions how much they give. So the priests, the Levites, the gatekeepers, the singers, and some of the people, the temple servants, and all Israel lived in their towns. My point is they went all in. As individuals, we should go all in, and we should fill our hearts. As Nehemiah was pursuing to fill it back with God's people, we should fill our hearts with what God would have us to do. So hopefully that's a message that we can all take away from tonight. Any thoughts or comments before we wrap up this evening? All right. So this coming Sunday, I believe Brother Jack is going to be leading us in a discussion on chapter 8 of Nehemiah. So be taking a look at Nehemiah chapter 8. I've really enjoyed our class. I've enjoyed the comments that have been made all throughout. Hopefully we're all taking something away from these lessons that we're learning in the Old Testament. So, all right. Thank you very much.